Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the year in a review for all the patches on League of Legends. So let's get into it. We're going to start with patch 13.1. So this was the patch which we led the year with. We weren't doing too hot in terms of the content we were getting. It was a pretty dark time. The new season cinematic dropped. It was terrible. No one really liked it and people were in a pretty bad spot about the game. But alongside all of that, we got a couple of changes. So the Roa buffs came out this patch, which made the likes of Kassadin and Ryze OP. They then ended up needing to be nerfed in the following patches, but for the most part, that was the big change this patch. Other than that, we saw the Jax mid scope, which gave him a new ultimate. Well, kind of. It was an adjustment to his ultimate to give it an active, which had a bit more impact rather than just being a shield, which, well, not even a shield, it was just an effect which gave him additional resists. Alongside this, though, not a huge amount of changes, some adjustments towards things that were dominating at Worlds and outliers in solo queue. Yuumi nerfs, this was pre her mid scope, so seeing more of those. But yeah, that's mostly what patch 13.1 consisted of. Moving on to patch 13.1b, we saw more changes. These were changes towards Grievous Wounds. Demonic Embrace was still performing very well. Maokai Jungle was still in a very good spot. Alongside all of this, we had the marksman changes, which were the big thing this patch. Marksmans were a big topic this season, just in general, across the early parts of the 13.1b going on, they were really strong. We then had the mid patch, which gave them even more strength, and marksman kind of dominated for a bit after that. We had the static saga. But yeah, this was kind of the beginning of marksman receiving a lot of love and kind of just dominating the game for a while. So yeah, that was the main thing this patch. Another notable thing is Orianna. This is the streak of Orianna buffs. This is where it starts and how she ended up kind of dominating at Worlds this year. So yeah, keep that in mind. Orianna gets a lot of buffs from here on. Moving on to patch 13.3, there was no 13.2 as there was issues at Riot. I'm pretty sure they got hacked or something and lost a lot of data, which created some issues around their patch cycle, and that's why we ended up skipping 13.2, which kind of ended up being 13.1b. In this patch, we saw the ASO update. It was a full kit reshape. They took away his balls and gave him a bunch of cool new abilities. His E is a black hole. His ult is a really cool long-range knock-up ability where he basically just drags a star down from the heavens and throws it at someone. Yeah, a bunch of cool changes there. I really like the ASO update. I'm just kind of sad the direction they ended up then taking it, where they kind of just pushed it towards being gatekept and low elo. It really does struggle quite a bit in high elo, which is why you don't see a huge amount of it. But yeah, low elo champ, really, really good. Has been ever since its release. Alongside that, in this patch, we saw a bunch of buffs to engage supports. This is where engage supports really started coming into the meta and dominating. The likes of Thresh, Rakan, still really good at the moment. Alistar saw play in the top lane very briefly, but for the most part, still a very solid support. Nautilus, Braum, also really solid options. Pyke didn't quite land where they wanted him to. He then ended up getting follow-up buffs, but a bunch of changes here which were very nice towards engage supports. Moving on to patch 13.4, we saw buffs towards mostly no, I think this was the patch before MSI. Oh no, this would have actually been quite distant from MSI. Just a bunch of changes, kind of shaking up the side of Q meta. Then we saw the adjustment towards Thresh, pushing him more towards Q max. They also took away some of the refund on the CD on this ability at some point. Don't remember if this was this patch, but that ended up happening. Thresh, though, received a lot of love. He was in a pretty bad spot at the beginning of this season for a very popular support. They wanted to fix that without making him too pro skewed, which is why he received a bunch of changes for this season. However, the main thing here is, once again, Orianna got buffs and Malphite. So if you don't remember, at the beginning of the season, well, fairly early on to the season, so patch 13.4, Malphite meta. Malphite became the strongest top laner in the game. He had a insanely strong W, as it received a bunch of buffs in this patch, and he then kind of went on to take over for a bit. Iceborne was really good on him. Sunfire was really good on him. People were still, at this point, kind of forcing Hearthstone on every single tank in the top lane, when a lot of them just couldn't really run it as they weren't great users of it. But yeah, Malphite got really strong off this patch, and then I believe got nerfed fairly shortly after. Moving on to 13.5, we saw nerfs towards ASO, but still performing quite well. They nerfed his E down quite a bit. They also nerfed some of his damage, as he was just overperforming by a significant margin and kept gaining win rate in low elo. Other changes in 30.5 include the Yuumi rework. This was the big change towards Yuumi, which kind of pushed her more towards only being very viable with on-hit marksman in the bot lane. Zeri, Yuumi still ended up going on to be a really obnoxious pairing. She was still viable in competitive play until they really heavily nerfed Yuumi and Zeri. But yeah, at this point, Yuumi rework came out. This was kind of like the solution to all the Yuumi problems. It just didn't really work the way they wanted it to, and it just made her more frustrating in a lot of ways. Moving on to patch 13.6. This was the Vayne patch. There wasn't really much else to talk about. They did some Jake changes. I believe they made them a bit stronger. A couple of system changes towards overperforming marksman items. But yeah, mostly the notable thing here is the Vayne change, where they made Vayne have a really strong AD ratio on her Q, which is why we now see Triforce QMax build being very popular on Vayne, as that was kind of where it led from. Something like a 115% AD ratio, I believe, on this ability. So it's not a huge amount of changes. I can just scroll down and should be able to find this. But yeah, it went all the way up to 115% from 80%. Yeah, put her in a really good spot. The W nerfs didn't end up doing a huge amount. If anything, it made her less frustrating while making her more powerful, which was a good change. Only now she is too strong and kind of taking over the game. Let's move on. So patch 13.7, this was the MSI patch. We saw changes towards Abyssal Mask and Catalyst, as these items were very much performing well. Even then, we saw the likes of Nautilus mid with Abyssal appear quite a bit at MSI. We saw nerfs towards some of the staples within competitive play, the likes of Vi, Wukong, Sidorani get nerfed a lot over this season. All are in a pretty weak spot, if anything, at the moment. Vi performing a bit better because they ended up doing follow-up changes later on. But yeah, for the moment, they were nerfing these champs quite a bit as they were overperforming in competitive play. This was also the Azir W patch, where they really tried to push for people to max W on Azir, even though people were still maxing Q. So that was all pretty interesting. Moving on to patch 13.8, we saw changes towards mostly Cosmic Drive, which was the kind of like... it went from being an item which gave you 40 AP when fully stacked to now its current version where it just gives you 20% movement speed and has the 100 AP flat on it, which is I'd say better item. It feels a lot better to use, definitely. But most notable here, Jarvan got nerfed pretty heavily. He was very much overperforming in solo queue, but just didn't see a huge amount of play at MSI, which kind of took everyone by surprise as he was performing so well. We then later on see at Worlds that this was a mistake and people should be picking him, but just kind of forgot about the champion. So yeah, that's where he was left in that situation. 13.9 brought in the Kayle ult changes, which made it so she could attack during her ultimate, put her in a pretty good spot. Most people still were maxing E at this point, rather than maxing Q, which was her better max ability. But alongside this, we also saw the Neeko mid-scope, which was a bunch of changes to make her more interactive to play with. But also then resulted in a Neeko meta, where Neeko kind of just ended up dominating for a while. 13.10 comes around, and this is the mid patch. We saw a bunch of marksman item changes. This was the continuation of marksman's being really strong, the start of the static saga. Kindred ended up getting hotfix buffed, which ended up being a mistake, as she was really, really strong after this hotfix buff. And yeah, that's kind of how this patch ended up playing out. Kindred was really, really strong, and a bunch of marksmen were overperforming. Moving on to the patch after this, 13.11, we saw changes towards Rell. This was the Rell mid-scope. She was terrible on release, and they had to instantly mid-patch hotfix update her, as she was just performing so poorly. She then ended up dominating, and I'm pretty sure she gets nerfed in the next patch. We also saw the Ivern update, which was a bunch of changes to make him more fun to play, but also then resulted in Ivern being one of the best junglers until even today. He's still really good at the moment. Also, alongside this, we saw the Rek'Sai update, which made her really good. And then she got nerfed like 6 or 7 patches in a row. Well, maybe not in a row, but like along the line. She was still overperforming in like every single patch, right into the last one. And now she's kind of weak, if anything. She still performs alright, But yeah, there's definitely better junglers at the moment. And that was the main thing this patch. Rek'Sai performing really, really well. Moving on to patch 13.12, we saw changes towards Gragas. This was the Gragas nerf, which kind of took him out of pro play. He was a true three-way flex pick in jungle, mid, and top. He was really overperforming, and yeah, this was the nerfs that kind of took him out of that. Rumble changes came in. These now are really broken. Most high elo players constantly complaining about this champion being in a really oppressive spot. We saw more Orianna buffs. A continuation of just showing how weak she was and how she kind of led into being really, really meta. But yeah, the main thing here, Rumble got a huge change. Now has 150 heat instead of 100, and is really, really oppressive in laning phase. 13.13 comes around. It is still continuation of the static saga. It is still really, really powerful. They did buff it at one point because it was kind of underperforming, and then they kept adjusting it, changing it, nerfing it, just to try and put it in a spot where it wasn't being abused by champions which shouldn't abuse it, and made it more of a stat stick item, which is what it is today, more of a stat stick item. And yeah, follow-up nerfs towards a bunch of overperformers. Rek'Sai getting nerfed, Kindred getting nerfed because she was really overbuffed, Ivern getting nerfed because he was performing too well, Annie getting nerfed. She was a really top performer toward in the middle of the season, and I believe even early season. She's still alright now, but not as strong as she used to be. 30.14 comes around, and this is the Arena patch. Arena drops, people really enjoy it. Neferi also comes out here. Really strong stat stick. Assassin, insanely good scaling. One of the best scalers in the game, actually. Yeah, just performs really well. Definitely a low elo skewed champion, but quite popular. So, alongside that, we also got the Shyvana update. This was the change, which now means that her Q applies double on hit, makes AD more attractive on her. Yeah, because she also, alongside this, received a bunch of AD changes, which just made her pretty good. They then ended up nerfing her like a patch later and basically killing her. She doesn't really see any play anymore. But yeah, she got like one patch to shine, which was pretty nice. Alongside this, the main one is the Aatrox change, which gave him like a 55% win rate. This was the 100% AD ratio on the Q change, which obviously scales up on his third Q and meant he could literally one-shot like any squishy with a third Q with both builds. His assassin mode wasn't really popularized at this point, I don't believe, but was still something which people did go. Definitely a option there. We also got the Xerath update, which meant he had more shots on his ultimate. That was pretty nice. Definitely makes him a little bit more consistent and a lot more popular as a mid lane mage option. 30.15 was a continuation of nerfs. Aatrox, Ivern, Maokai, Sejuani, Shyvana getting kind of killed here, which was a bit unfortunate. This was also the pet update where we saw changes to a lot of pet champions. Talia also received buffs, which kind of gave her a resurgence. She was a lot better in the jungle and in the mid lane. Still sees a decent amount of play in both as a really popular option. 30.16 was the Akali and Sylas buffs, which really pushed them into being good champions at Worlds this year. Akali received some nice changes towards her Q and her... I think it was Q damage and Q energy cost. Alongside this, we saw Sylas receive some base mana, which really helped his Night Harvester builds, which is why he ended up overperforming solo Q more recently. 13.17 was a continuation of the... Well, I believe this was the final Orianna change, which really pushed her into being good for competitive. Alongside this, we saw a bunch of Bruiser changes, which were pretty good. Like Rise, Inzal, Hecarim, Aatrox were more attractive to players' options. This was where Aatrox received some magic damage towards his W and his passive. 30.18, we saw change. Well, this was the Briar release patch where she ended up being really strong because of her assassin build. Still is really strong because of her assassin build. Bard also received an update. He ended up getting a lot of win rate out of this, but they didn't follow up nerf him. Yeah, he was pretty strong. Ended up being really popular. Well, not really popular at Worlds, but like a really good solid pick at Worlds when people were willing to pick him. 30.19 was the AD LeBlanc panic, where they nerfed Static Shiv and LeBlanc to make sure it wasn't broken at Worlds. Syndra also received buffs. She was the only one who received buffs to really like give her access at Worlds to be a solid pick. None of the awards really ended up showing up. 30.20 was the K'Sante adjustment. He wasn't broken yet, but the patch after, as this was kind of like the main highlight of this patch, was the patch where he ended up being broken. He got buffed here and kind of took over the game. B hotfixed after him. Did do enough, but was kind of on the right track to like putting him in a more balanced spot. Whether he's balanced at the moment, kind of depends on what elo you're in. For a lot of elos, he is still pretty good. Below elo, he's still definitely stronger as an option. Brand, Zyra, Morgana all got jungle changes, and Seraphine got an update here, so that was pretty good. Seraphine then got follow-up adjusted in 13.22. We also saw the Janna adjustment, which kind of changed the way she wanted to play. WMAX Janna became a lot more popular, and QMAX Janna kind of fell off, but people took time to realise that, so she got buffed, and is now really performing quite well. Jarvan got nerfed in this patch. This was finally the patch which took him out of being OP. Azir got on-hit changes here, which was quite big for him. And then the patch which we're currently on, Wei has been released. He is now in a good spot after 3 but lots of buffs, I believe. Alongside this, Galio is really strong, and they nerfed a lot of meta mid staples. So, yeah, pretty good patch. And overall, Worlds was pretty good. Lots of people enjoyed it, especially for tier 1 kind of like gaining back their legacy. I mean, 4 Worlds trophies is a big achievement, and Faker obviously put a lot of effort into it alongside all of his teammates. We are going to be getting a prestige top laner skin, which is cool. And overall, yeah, this year was full of highs and lows. Started out pretty bad, definitely got a lot better towards the end of it, and hopefully with all the rift changes next season and the removal of mythics, we get to see a good amount of meta changes and a good amount of like exciting picks and diversity. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, have a good year, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.